partially why candles were given out as gifts for Saturnalia was not just to, like light them around the solstice and celebrate like the sun and a solar holiday, but maybe to literally like warm the heart of Hades. Welcome back to the Diaries of a Witch podcast. My name is Angelica Crashi, and today I wanted to talk all about the magic of December. We are officially in the last month of 2024, and there is so many interesting festivals and types of magic, and just like the vibe of the month, I feel like is so magical and vibrant. I mean, I could probably say that about every month, and that's the thing that I love about being a witch and being a pagan, is that I get to work with these holidays. I get to, celebrate and really consider each season and what those things are bringing into our life and magical practice. As far as December goes, there are so many incredible festivals. They all tend to have something in common with one another. This will not necessarily be a video or a podcast episode that talks about pagan origins of Christmas or any other topics like that. But we will be talking about some of the festivals that are happening in December across sort of a range of pagan belief systems. And I will be mentioning one from the Christian sphere as well. So I wanted to talk about those festivals as well as just the general vibe of December magically, how we can work with December magically. So the first festival that I wanted to discuss is actually not a pagan festival. It is a feast day for a saint. So December 13th is the feast day of Saint Lucy. Saint Lucy is one of the patron saints of my family. This idea of having a family saint is quite popular in a lot of Italian and Italian American families. My particular family's patron saints are Saint Anthony and Santa Lucia, or Saint Lucy. And my grandmother just like loved both of those saints and really worked with them a lot. She would pray to them a lot, and we would celebrate the feast day of Saint Lucy on December 13th. This particular saint is really fascinating, not just because she's my family's patron saint, but she's really well loved and celebrated throughout a lot of places in Europe. Obviously, Italy and Sicily. I believe she's the city patron of Syracuse in Sicily, and she's also celebrated widely in the Scandinavian regions and the Germanic regions. She is just a very widely loved saint, and a lot of that I think has to do with the fact that her feast day is taking place in December, kind of right before Christmas, right before solstice. And it used to, or there's evidence that it used to be more in alignment with Christmas and the solstice, and especially sort of held right around the solstice time, where there was lots of symbolism of light being brought back into the world. Obviously, the Christians have their kind of version of that with the light being Jesus, and then obviously the pagans, generally speaking, are going to see it more as the actual sun, right? The solar force, the sun literally taking back its power from the dark winter days. So because of all these correspondences around the solstice and her feast day falling very close to the solstice, part of her feast day has to do with light and lighting candles. And especially in the Scandinavian regions, there is this special headdress that you wear for St. Lucy's Day that has the candles on it. I don't know if you've ever seen what I'm talking about. I remember one of the American Girl dolls had that as I don't know if it was just in her book or if you could literally buy it for your American Girl doll, but I remember looking at the catalog for the American Girl dolls and seeing the St. Lucy headdress and being what is going on? What is this? What is happening? So her feast day has a lot to do with light and lighting candles. This is obviously very similar to some Yule traditions and just any other tradition around the solstice that has to do with light. Saint Lucy is the saint of eyes, and she can help with eye illnesses or eye problems or anything like that, right? That is kind of what she does. That is her whole vibe. Because of that, she's also associated with things like clarity. The reason why she's associated with eyes is because there's a couple of stories, and they're all a little bit different, but there's a couple of stories about her having to get her eyes gouged out or removed forcibly for basically not complying. Some stories talk about how she removed her own eyes so she would become like less desirable to male suitors because she was interested in a life of chastity so that she could devote that to God. So some of the tales have to do with her removing her eyes so she would become less desirable to suitors or men that wanted her hand in marriage, which, you know, kind of is giving Medusa a little bit, you know, like it's obviously very different. There's a little bit of that tone, which I think is kind of fascinating. So a lot of practitioners of Italian folk magic, or just really any type of folk tradition that utilizes and calls upon saints, will work with St. Lucy on her feast day of December 13th. I like to honor St. Lucy on this day, partially because she's one of my family's saints, and I like to work with both St. Anthony on his feast day, which is June 13th, and then St. Lucy on her feast day, December 13th. But St. Lucy is one of those saints that I think can be really, really helpful to call upon for a variety of different types of magic. So because she is the patron saint of clarity and eyes and eyesight, you can really call upon her when you feel like you don't have clarity on a situation, or you maybe like can't see into the future for something and you really don't know where to go or what direction to go in. She's really helpful to petition for things like that. She can also be helpful to petition when you are wanting to help yourself or somebody else see the truth in a situation. So let's say you are dealing with like a person in your life where you just feel like they are not getting it, like maybe they are being taken advantage of, or they just maybe see you in a different way, and you want to work on that perception and shift that and help them see more clearly or like factually about something. You can work with St. Lucy to accomplish that. And I remember a couple of years ago, I was talking to a magical mentor of mine who works with saints, and I was telling them about how I was having this like issue with a family member, and my magical mentor was like, oh, you should totally work with St. Lucy on this because, you know, she's really helpful at helping other people see the truth of the matter, or maybe like helping them kind of get on the same page as you, or helping both of you understand each other better. So she's really good at resolving issues, especially when two people are not like seeing eye to eye or getting along. And I also love working with her for anything that has to do with the evil eye. I like to work with her on purifying the evil eye, like getting rid of the evil eye, because part of her, I almost said mythology, I guess it's kind of a mythos, right? Part of the story around her eyes is that, I forget exactly what timeline this was, if it was when she died or if it was like during her life, but her eyes were restored, her eyesight, and just like literally her physical eyes were restored to her head, because remember, like they were taken out, you know, they were like taken out of her socket. So the eyes were put back in a miracle, and she restored her eyesight. So I also really like working with her specifically to cleanse the evil eye, because I think especially when it comes to like that idea of the restoration and this almost like purity and the light and the clarity that's associated with her, it makes a lot of sense that she would be really helpful for purification, especially of evil eye, right? Or, you know, removing the evil eye. So I like to call upon her when I'm in that removal stage. And if you are interested in ways that you can work with St. Lucy or that specific spell that I talked about around clarity and getting people to understand you, I do have the entire spell write-up for that on my Patreon. So going in order, the next super fun festival is Saturnalia, which this one is my favorite. Saturnalia is so dear to me. I love this holiday. This is one of the holidays that I personally celebrate, take really seriously, love. I am just obsessed with Saturnalia. So why am I obsessed with Saturnalia? Why do I like it so much? Why should you like it? Basically, Saturnalia is a Roman festival that celebrates Saturn or Kronos, and there's a really fascinating story around this. So essentially, if we think back to the mythology of Kronos or Saturn, after he loses the Titanomachy, right, after his children rebel against him and wage this war against the Titans, he is imprisoned in Tartarus, and he is bound and chained, and he's locked up in Tartarus, right? He is, like sort of the villain of that story, and he ends up, getting locked up. So in ancient Rome, there was a large city statue of Saturn, and this statue was always bound by woolen rope, specifically around like his feet. And on Saturnalia, which takes place on December 17th and goes all the way until December 24th, it's like a week-long festival. During that time, and starting on December 17th, the ropes or the chains that were on the statue to Saturn were taken off and removed, and this was called the loosening of the bonds of Saturn, right? This idea of the loosening of the bonds is something that comes up time and time again in a lot of other magical techniques or even astrological techniques. Most notably, there is an ancient astrological technique called zodiacal releasing. This is still used today. It's a timing technique that tells you what parts of your life are going to be more important or when certain things are being activated in your life. So it's really helpful to look at your zodiacal releasing chart and kind of understand, this might be like a peak period for me, this might be a really important time of my life, or this is when things are changing. In zodiacal releasing, there is sort of this phenomenon that is named after the loosening of the bonds of Saturn, and it's essentially a moment in your life, right, in your zodiacal releasing chart where things are going to change rapidly for you. It's a very important time period. Sometimes it can mark like really swift, serious change. Sometimes it's for the better, sometimes it's not, but this phenomenon in zodiacal releasing is called the loosening of the bonds, which I just think is so interesting, and directly relates back to Saturnalia. So they didn't just release the binds off of the statue of Saturn, but a lot of people were freed from having to do work-related tasks. So a lot of the working class, the lower class, the slaves were freed temporarily for the week, and they were given presents, and they were basically like not doing any work that week. This was a time of gift giving and gambling and just like kind of merriment and just like a ton of festivities and just like fun things happening. A lot of the working class or the lower classes would receive like money or gifts or bonuses from their employers. There was kind of this like role reversal thing that happened where the working class would not have to work, but then the upper class or the aristocratic class would actually take on some of that work. And just the whole vibe of Saturnalia was let's party, let's have fun, let's just, celebrate the fact that we too were removed from the things that we are bound by, right? If we're bound by things like work and labor during Saturnalia, those things were removed from the majority of the working class's life. It's also really interesting astrologically because it starts on December 17th and it goes until the 24th. And during that time period of that week, somewhere in that week, right, is the solstice, which is also when the sun moves from the sign of Sagittarius into the sign of Capricorn, which creates the solstice. That migration is the solstice point. And so it is fascinating because the sun is moving into a Saturn-ruled sign, and it will be the first of two Saturn-ruled signs in a row. So we have Capricorn and then Aquarius. So in a way, it is sort of this symbolic like entrance into the winter-long festival of Saturn that happens from December until February. I like to celebrate Saturnalia in a couple different ways. First of all, there's a lot of like holiday parties during this week in general. So whenever I go to some sort of like party or gathering or event, I always like to think of these events as like Saturnalia events, right? Like everybody is getting excited, getting ready, everybody's relaxing, everybody's, worked all year, and now during this time period, they get to do a little bit of relaxing. I know that this time period might actually be extremely busy for some people, and you don't actually have the luxury to be like, all right, I am loosening the bonds and I am not working and I'm not doing any of that, right? But if you have the opportunity at any time in the month of December, like even if it's, past Saturnalia in like the later half of the month, if you have any time at all to rest and relax, you can do that as part of the advent of Saturnalia, right? Like you can do that and dedicate that restful time to sort of this ancient festival and this idea, or even dedicating that time to the energy of Saturn. On December 17th, I like to do a symbolic loosening of the bonds. So I do this in like two ways. I have a Saturn statue that I will literally like remove the ropes and bonds off of. So I have him bound throughout the rest of the year. And then during this week-long period, I will take off the bonds of Saturn. And I do this in a ceremony, and it is really fun, and I love it. It's such a fun tradition. I feel like this is something that you could totally do with like kids or potentially even family who are interested in this. I think that sometimes a thing that is missing from a lot of like pagan ritual celebrations and stuff like that is a specific, ritual that you do to celebrate a holiday. I think that this happens a lot in more organized religious holidays where like there is just this one tradition that everybody does. And at some point, maybe it just feels like, oh, I don't even really know why we're doing this, but we're having to, take off the bonds of Saturn, right? Obviously, I think it's a good thing to keep in mind why we're doing these holidays and why we're doing these traditions. But I think that removing the bonds off of Saturn can be a really fun way to celebrate Saturnalia, and a potential tradition that you could make with your family or just with yourself as a solitary practitioner to welcome in the winter season, welcoming in the 2 months of, Capricorn season and Aquarius season, basically almost the entire winter. We're ushering that in. We are choosing rest as much as we can, right? We are thinking about the year, and we are almost like giving ourselves bonuses or gifts, or just enjoying the things that we have made, right? Because the Saturn seasons are not necessarily the most bountiful times of year, right? They are wintry times. Even, in different hemispheres and that sort of thing, the Saturn months are, because they're of the nature of Saturn, they're symbolically dry, they're symbolically cold, right? So even if that's not happening in your like climate, that's like the astrological vibe of those months, for the most part, from the sun sign vibes, right? And so there's almost this idea of, okay, we are going to do some resting and regenerating through the entire winter, like the coziness of winter, right? And resting, so that we can prepare after the Saturn seasons to kind of go back into like action mode and doing things. And we will generate and generate and generate. And then the next Saturnalia, we will go, wow, we really did a lot. And that was great. And I'm proud of myself, right? So that is how I would envision Saturnalia if you are practicing it as a modern witch or pagan. And then we are actually inviting the energy of Saturn, the great malefic planet, right, into our lives to cut and clear things that need to go, to remove things, to allow us to have rest, to allow us to have this restful time period, right? I think a lot of the times we always view Saturn as like this negative force in the zodiac, or like as this negative force in the sky that's always trying to, fuck us over or something. But if we think about how the ancients celebrated Saturnalia, it was maybe not a great time to be like an aristocrat because you had to give all your workers money and gifts, and you had to actually like, step in and do the work that they were not doing this week. But if you were part of any other class, this was a really awesome time period. And I think that we have to remember that when we think about Saturn, is that when Saturn cuts things out of, your life, or cuts things out of somebody's life, right? There's always maybe like somebody that benefits, or some presence that benefits, right? Or some situation. So we have to remember that Saturn is not always trying to fuck us over and create negative things. And then it brings us into like this broader conversation that's almost similar to the idea of like memento mori, where, we think about things like death and loss and these, Saturnine forces, these plutonic forces, we often think of these things as bad, negative. We don't want them. We don't want to think about them. We don't want to bring them into our lives. But the idea of memento mori teaches us that when we are having fun, when we are enjoying things in our life, we have to bring in the ideas of death and loss and all of these things, or we should, or we ought to, recall these things, remember these things, and think about these things, not because we're bringing them into our life now, but because we don't always have to associate those things with something bad or negative or terrible. And the entire idea of Saturnalia being a festival of merriment dedicated to the god Saturn, who is, a villain in the story with Zeus and all of the siblings, right? He's sort of the villain of that story in a way, from their perspective, at least from the Olympians' perspective. We often see him as the great villain of the skies, right? The great malefic planet. But he doesn't have to be malefic all the time, or we don't have to even see things as benefic and malefic. There are plenty of things that Jupiter and Venus can bring into our life that are really negative or could potentially be negative long term. There's also things that Saturn or Mars can bring into our life that are actually so helpful for us long term, so amazing, and just help us create and generate so much amazing stuff moving forward, right? I'm a Capricorn. I'm a Saturn ruled person. And I find that there are so many Saturnian qualities that I have that are not negative. Like, they are actually super positive, and there are so many times in my life where I'm so happy that I'm a Saturnian person. But it gives you some perspective on thinking about the things that we often see as negative or bad, even like winter, right? The cold, the dreariness, the darkness, those things about winter, maybe they're not so bad. Maybe there's nothing wrong with them. Maybe for whatever reason maybe for whatever reason we've just been told that these things are bad. And in reality, we have to recognize as witches that these things are also really important, really potent, really powerful. Going along with sort of the same theme as Saturnalia, we have Yule. A lot of the times, Yule will be celebrated by practitioners for 12 days. There's sort of this idea with Yule that the Yuletide season lasts 12 days, or the idea of the Yule log, which is this log that you're supposed to burn in your fireplace or just burn in general for 12 days. And the, wood from this log is sort of symbolically going to warm your house all winter, or the symbolism of it is that it sort of brings in light in the particularly darkest time of the winter so that it can shorten the winter, or maybe bring like a, more pleasant spring or something like that. There's other ways that people work with the idea of the Yule log, and just even like lighting candles and stuff for this time of year, but that is primarily why you would employ a Yule log and why the 12 days is important. So similarly to how we would light candles on Halloween or Day of the Dead or Samhain to help spirits cross over and to kind of guide them into the underworld or into the afterlife, the same thing is true for Yule, especially in like the Norse region. Back to Saturnalia, candles are also important in Saturnalia. There were specific candles that were made during this week-long festival and given out at the end of the festival to essentially be lit, probably around the solstice, because the festival ends, a couple days before the solstice, or sometimes if the solstice falls a little bit later, it will literally end on the solstice. And so these candles were supposed to be given out and lit at the very end of the festival. There was a story that the Romans would have been familiar with around this candle giving myth. It sort of maybe inspired the candle giving myth. And long story short, the story was about the fact that Heracles was telling people to light candles for Hades, as sort of a celebratory thing, as a offering. And, this is just so fascinating in so many ways as an underworld devotee and a Hades devotee. Partially why candles were given out as gifts for Saturnalia was not just to, light them around the solstice and celebrate the sun and a solar holiday, but maybe to literally warm the heart of Hades, or offered to Hades in some way. They probably weren't thanking him, but they were maybe offering to him in some way to make the winters less harsh, or to maybe try to bring in the spring faster or something like that. And we see obviously that very similar tradition going on with Yule and the lighting of the Yule log or Yule candles or any of that type of thing. This is also why candles are employed for St. Lucy's Day, and why a lot of people would celebrate St. Lucy's Day, is they somehow believed that if you celebrated St. Lucy's Day, she would help to shorten the winter. This is the podcast where I bring everything back to Hades. Everything leads back to Hades in my mind, at least. But I just think it's so fascinating because of all of these things, all of these festivals, the mythology, and just kind of like the meaning behind all of these holidays. I would really recommend working with like rebirth magic around this time, or transformation magic. We talked about the solstice in reference to the other holidays. But the solstice in and of itself is just such a powerful time, where is such a powerful mythology for like taking back your power against like an adversary or against something, right? So I know we just said like Saturn is not a bad person, death is not a bad thing, darkness in general, winter, like none of that is a bad thing, which is true, right? But if we think about it maybe from the sun's perspective, right? The sun has been in this part of the year where the sun is not as strong. The sun throughout the whole winter, in the northern hemisphere, is not able to like warm the days as much, right? And so the temperature drops. All of these things are true. So from the perspective of the sun, the solstice is this really powerful time where the sun starts to take back a little bit of power. So I like to always think of Dionysus. I like to think of Zagreus, who is sort of the ancient or, precursor, if you will, to Dionysus. And both of these deities have really interesting mythology around transformation and rebirth. I think Zagreus's is most poignant, and he's sort of like an epithet in a way of Dionysus. But essentially what happens with Zagreus is he is born, and, there's a little bit of like discourse as around who his parent is. Is it Zeus? Is it Hades? Who is it, right? But Persephone is his mother, and his father is either Hades or Zeus. And he is born, he represents light, like he's literally a deity of light and of enlightenment. And the ancient Orphics worshipped him as this deity that could help to bring them into a different kind of consciousness, or to help them when they crossed over in the underworld, so that they could live with the gods, so that they could make it to Elysian Fields or the Blessed Isles, and they would be able to escape essentially like the human world and the cycle of reincarnation through Zagreus's help. So because he was really powerful, and he symbolized this, and he symbolized almost like humans being not, like getting to move on from being human, the Titans were like, what is happening here? Like, this is a little bit much. I don't know if we're ready for this. And so specifically Saturn, or Kronos, right? And some of the other deities, like the Titan deities, they destroyed him, they killed him, they tore him apart, and the only thing that was left over was his heart. His heart was placed into the body of Dionysus, right? Zeus's son, by Semele, and Semele started to carry Zagreus, or, he became Dionysus when he was born to Zeus. Semele technically dies when, before Dionysus is born, which is like this other thing that happens, which is really interesting, that like threatens the life force. And so Zeus has to sew him into his thigh, and eventually Dionysus, sprouts and is a really powerful solar deity, right? But he had to go through all of this stuff, all of these transformations and transmutations, and this threat to like his life, in order to become the solar deity that he is today, which I think is really fascinating. And that whole idea of like transformation and transmutation, and taking the heart, which is a solar symbol, and placing it into, this other god and just like the whole thing, I think is a great way to work with the idea of the solstice, especially from like a more Greco-Roman perspective. That's obviously what I lean towards. And so, if you're not really into like the Holly King thing or, which I don't really know the story that well, so I probably couldn't even like effectively tell you. Is it the oak and the Holly King? Like, I don't know. I'm sorry. You probably know more about that than I do, if you're into that type of mythology. But if you're trying to kind of think about the solstice from a different perspective, that's, a potential myth to look at that sort of describes this idea of like maybe taking power back from literally like Saturn, right? Who is trying to thwart and destroy, Dionysus or Zagreus from the start. And from the start, he's this deity of light, right? And he wants to bring enlightenment in some capacity to the mortals. And he ends up taking back his power when he is reborn as Dionysus. Obviously, candle magic is really helpful around this time of year, and so I would work with any type of candles, whether it's a candle for Hades or a candle that you're burning to St. Lucy or anything like that, right? Whether it's thaumaturgical, practical magic, spell work, doing, candle magic, or whether it's liturgical and, supposed to be some type of advent or some type of offering to a deity, I would really work with candles around this time. I think it's a really great way to, again, bring in the warmth into the winter. I always feel better when I'm burning candles. Like, I just feel like the coziness, and like I always light candles with the intention of bringing warmth into my life, even if it's just like a scented candle in my house. So working with that and even like doing things by candlelight or low light can be really fun this time of year. Obviously, solar magic, we were just talking about the sun and the solstice, but working solar magic at around this time of year, it's maybe a little bit different than the solstice or the solar magic I would work around the summer solstice when the sun is really strong. But you could do some stuff around like working with solar correspondences like pine cones, any herb that also has like blood moving qualities, because blood and the symbolism of the heart is sort of like a solar symbol. So any herb that also has blood moving qualities, like rosemary, is considered an herb of the sun. So maybe using them in herbal healing or creating a solar tea blend for the solstice could be really fun. I think doing magic for things like longevity, the longevity of projects, starting new projects, I think could be really helpful this time of year, especially like things that you want to seed or slowly start to bring into the world this time of year. Yule and the solstice is sort of symbolically associated with like the new moon. If you would look at like the wheel of the year, the 8 Sabbath wheel of the year, as similar to like the moon or the lunar cycle, the new moon, the dark time where you're planting those seeds and you don't know if they're going to grow yet, and there's a little bit of confusion as to whether or not the things that you've planted are actually going to come into fruition. That is also kind of what is going on this time of year, right? So you could maybe plant some seeds, do a little bit of magic like that this time of year. That could be really helpful. I especially like to plant seeds for the next year, right? So doing magic at around the solstice for specifically like 2025 can be really fun. And again, I would bring in some candles. I would even maybe like take like the idea of a Yule log and, get a log, drill some holes into it, put some candles in it. And you can even light like one candle for one wish that you have for 2025. I think that could be a super fun ritual. It can be something that you do with your friends or your family as well. And you could think of it as like the Yuletide energy of the 12 days. And you could do like one candle or one wish for every day or something, which could be really fun. I also like to, instead of using a Yule log, I like to tuck in my wishes for 2025 into a pine cone, which is again a solar thing. And you can obviously find pine cones like everywhere this time of year. So sticking those into a pine cone and either burning them now to kind of like release it, like you can burn it on the solstice, creating like a fire, or if you have a fireplace or a fire pit, creating a fire and burning the pine cone. And it sort of like releases all of those wishes and all of those spells into the next year. And it's a really good way to use like all of the symbolism of this time of year into one spell. It's fire, it's solar imagery and solar correspondences, it's wishes for the new year. It's all of these things. The last type of spell that I like to do this time of year is habit breaking spells and spells that help us like release the binds that we have towards things. So cord cutting spells, if you have to like remove yourself from a situation or from a person, this is a really great time to do that. Again, habit breaking. If there's something that you want to stop doing, if there is something that's been limiting you that you want to try to eliminate from your life, this is a great time to do it. And I would specifically work with like December 17th or just the entire 7-day period of Saturnalia for this, because the whole idea of Saturnalia is we are like freeing Kronos for that 1 week so that he can roam around. And we are also freeing ourselves from the binds that we have to like the world, essentially, right? To other people, to work, to all of these things. So it's an amazing symbolic time to break habits and literally remove yourself from things that you no longer want to have a part in. So I would work with that idea for the 7-day period. I think that sometimes cord cutting and habit breaking magic can be tricky, because sometimes the cords just immediately snap back into place or the habits start to reemerge eventually. So I think like doing this type of spell work throughout the 7-day period could be a really effective way to actually like put an end to those habits and those situations that you don't want to be a part of anymore. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I also wanted to let you know that our course sale is ending soon. So our course sale ends on December 6th, and I have basically bundled the courses by topic so that you can choose whatever course bundle is going to be the best for you in your magical practice right now. I also have 2 winter pre-sales available. So Catabasis, my Hades learning program, is coming back, and then a new program called Glamour Magic Mastery. It is all about like advancing in glamour magic. It's like my Glamour Magic 2 class, essentially. Those are both coming out this winter, and so you can actually buy the winter bundle, which has both of those bundled together, or you can shop those pre-sales individually. But check out the link in the show notes to look at all of the options that are on sale right now. Everything is basically on sale for about 50% off or more. I wanted to thank all of my patrons in the Diary and Coven tier. Thank you so much to Jamie, Cheryl, Emma, Alexis, Alessandra, Ashley, Luna, Taylor, Chelsea, Quinn, Floor, Megan A, Natalie S, Caitlin, Melissa, Natalie H, Jen, Carrie, Kat, Lauren, Kayla, Alethea, Lindsay, Tyla, Quinn, April, Peony, Danya, Joanna, Megan S, Megan R, Callie, Nina, Mia, Irene, Chelb, Haley, Abigail, Kristen, Desiree, BFG, Lunar and Obsidian, Emmy, Hannah, Georgia, Adri, Liz, and our newest member, Kay. Thank you so much. You guys are the best. I really appreciate your support. I really, really do, especially this time of year. And we are having our upcoming Coven tier solstice ritual on December 18th. So join us on December 18th in the Coven tier if you would like to participate in our Coven solstice ritual. Have an amazing rest of your day or night, and goodbye.